Hello again, Year 8s. Welcome to our next video on grammar and punctuation. And so today we're going to be looking at the use of dependent clauses. So last time we looked at independent clauses and the fact that a comma isn't appropriate for separating them. But today we're going to show you when a comma actually can be appropriate, because it's not the case of two independent clauses. This will make more sense as I go on. But essentially, first up, what is a dependent clause? It's also known as a subordinate clause. You might see that written somewhere. But it's essentially a sentence that cannot stand alone because it does not express a complete thought. So I'll show you an example in a minute. But like all clauses, a dependent clause should have a subject and a verb. So it should still function that way, but it just wouldn't make sense if you read it on its own. An example of this is this sentence, which had surfaced only 50 meters behind them. If we saw that written on its own, we'd think, what's going on? Immediately you can see that there is the verb there, surfaced, something is surfacing, and they've actually used an adverb to complete that sentence, talking about how it's happening, the fact that they're surfacing behind them, which leaves us to think that which, something they're referring to as which, might be the subject. But, as we can see, this sentence on its own doesn't make sense. Now, the proper sentence actually has this extra independent clause on top of it, which is the crew could see the whale. Now we can see that there is a subject, the crew. They are doing the action of seeing the object of a whale. So we can see when these two are put together, the crew could see the whale, which had surfaced only 50 meters behind them. We understand that the subject becomes the whale. Now, a bit of a hint for looking to identify dependent clauses is actually to look for subordinators or linking words. So, going back to the example here, this idea of which, this idea that they're linking this sentence to the next, we know that this is the dependent clause, and this one's functioning on its own. But some other subordinators or linking words can be words to compare and contrast. So although, even though, while, whereas, and we'll look at sentences with these in a minute. They might have cause and effects. So since, so that, because, until. Place and manner. Might say wherever or where, how. Possibility, it might be if or as if or whether and unless. And I'll show you some examples now. So, even though the train was late, I got to the exam on time. We can see that we've got a fully functioning sentence on the bottom here, I being the subject, got or getting there is the verb, object is the exam, and they've even added an adverb in to add that bit of detail to that sentence. So there's a full independent clause there functioning. And then we see the dependent clause here. It still has a subject, the train, doing the verb of doing that thing, which was being late. But we've got this funny thing over here, even though, which is actually our subordinator. So even though this does have a subject and a verb and it functions as a sentence, if we're reading it aloud on its own, even though the train was late, it sort of leaves you hanging on, doesn't it? What happens even though it's late? I need more information for this to make sense. So we can see that that doesn't function as a sentence on its own, and it actually needs that independent clause added to it to make sense. Something to remember is that you can actually structure it a different way. You might come across a sentence with a dependent and independent clause that looks like this. I got to the exam on time even though the train was late. So they've swapped it around, and it still makes sense. But you're just looking for that even though, and this second part of the sentence is the dependent clause because it's got the even though within that clause. I got to the exam on time could have functioned as a sentence on its own. Now, a bit of practice for you as we go through this video. I am not tidying the dishes unless Peter helps. So you can see there's sort of two parts to this sentence. Without punctuation, you're sort of prompted to pause. I am not tidying the dishes unless Peter helps. So, which is the dependent clause and which is the independent clause in this sentence. Second example, the excellence of a gift lies in how appropriate it is rather than how valuable it is. This one's much more obvious than the previous. There's a comma there making it really clear where the two clauses are separated. The excellence of a gift lies in how appropriate it is rather than how valuable it is. So again, asking the question, which is the dependent clause and which is the independent clause? And finally, do you know the butcher who went to court on Saturday? Similar to that first one, we're sort of prompted to pause a bit at that who, that word there. Do you know the butcher who went to court on Saturday? So can you figure out which is which there? Now, getting into how this is relevant for you in your writing is looking at the main error we see, and that is sentence fragments. So this is when you treat an independent clause as a complete sentence. So as I've been talking about in this video, that's meant to say dependent clause here in the video, just ignore that little in there. You're treating a dependent clause as a complete sentence, as I said earlier in the video, which was surfaced 50 meters behind them, didn't make sense on its own. So, another example, the incorrect version is, because I forgot the exam was today. We can see you're wondering, what because, you know? Now, you might have had this written in your essay as, or letter or whatever it might be, I was very stressed because I forgot the exam was today. But by putting a full stop there, you're making us think it's a new thought. So when I'm marking this as a teacher, I see this as a thought on its own, and it doesn't make sense. I think that you're prompting me to want to pause here, and so it just doesn't make sense. So, what is the strategy? Is you combine the two clauses, as we saw in the examples there. I was very stressed because I forgot the exam was today. And you can see you've got a coordinator in there, because combining them two. Just like we were doing last week with the two independent clauses, you look at how they were linked. Now, you forgot the exam, and so because makes sense as linking it, that forgetting the exam led you to be stressed. And now you also can structure that, swapping it around. Because I forgot the exam today, comma, I was stressed. Now you would notice that there's a comma in the second one, but not in the first. That's because the because in this first one leads directly from, this is the result, and it was because of this. And now you're saying, because of this, here is the result. Now that might sound a bit confusing, but you can see how you're led to pause here because you've got the because in the middle of the sentence. I was very stressed today because I forgot the exam was today. Now you need to cause the same pause when you separate these two clauses down here. Because I forgot the exam was today, I was very stressed. You can see that reading that without a comma just doesn't make sense. You need to create a pause for your reader to understand that they're two separate things. Because I forgot the exam today, I was very stressed. So it's really just about understanding how punctuation's used to create the flow in your thoughts. You're guiding the person reading it when to pause and when to continue on. And we'll continue to see how this develops. Now, once you've finished this video, I want you having a go at a paragraph and finding all the sentence fragments in it and fixing it up. But that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.